We all know the One Piece is the ultimate goal of many pirates on the Grand Line, but what exactly is it? While Oda confirmed there will indeed be physical treasure at Laugh Tale, of course, the One Piece will also hold significant symbolic value, and will likely change the world once it's discovered. For sure, the final island will be multifaceted, with a few different elements that make it up, but the centerpiece has to be the One Piece treasure. Now, there are already a ton of ideas of what the One Piece could be, but there is actually one I heard about a couple of years ago that stands out more and more as time goes on. Putting it together with some other ideas we've had about Laugh Tale, we can actually take a pretty solid guess at something specific the One Piece treasure might be. You may have seen a user commenting in a few different live streams over the years by the name Sozo. This user contacted me a few years back after he heard I'd been digging deep into what we both think is the most important and underrated symbol in the entire series. In fact, at the time he even had it as his profile picture. Anywho, Sozo asked me to make a video based on an idea he had about what the One Piece is, and so I looked into it. I pretty quickly noticed some interesting connections, and some strange panels that certainly stood out as intentional from Oda, but I couldn't wrap my single brain cell around how it would be relevant. A couple of years later, and I might actually be sold on the idea, so without further ado, I'm Den Kushi, and this is what the One Piece is. To predict what the One Piece treasure is, we need to understand its nature. We know the One Piece stands as the greatest mystery in the story as it acts as the title. Left by Goldie Roger, the former Pirate King, this treasure is said to reside on Laugh Tale, the final island of the Grand Line and the end of the New World, both literally and metaphorically. Reaching Laugh Tale makes a person the Pirate King, aka the freest person in the world. However, this does not automatically grant access to whatever was left there from the Void Century. We know this because Roger arrived too early to be able to completely fulfill Joy Boy's will. This tells us that there are certain conditions that need to be met in order for the One Piece to truly reveal itself, such as being there at the right time. We can speculate what these conditions are, but for now let's focus on the actual One Piece treasure. So the One Piece is a pirate treasure left by the previous Pirate King. Interestingly, Luffy, the future Pirate King, outright tells us what his personal treasure is, which is his straw hat. The straw hat symbolizes a bond between the old era and the new era. Luffy puts his straw hat on Nami, telling us that the bonds with his nakama are also Luffy's treasure. So if the One Piece is tied to Luffy, as it is Joy Boy, then it's likely something that connects to bonds. Arta's Mega Theory predicted the One Piece would be Sake Cups, echoing the idea that bonds play a key role at Laugh Tale. In One Piece, we are told bonds are strengthened through emotions, which comes from humanity, a key aspect of Oda's message. Throughout the story, Oda connects humanity to their heart, giving us our first proper clue what the One Piece might be. It's something like a heart, something that represents all the elements important to the story. After all, One Piece was originally named Romance Dawn, and romance is an aspect associated with the heart. Luffy says, power isn't decided by your size, but by the size of your heart and dreams. Zoro tells us that being removed from your heart is what takes you to hell in the quote, I've had this feeling before. Everything around me was eerily silent. My heartbeat was like distant thunder. It was like standing at the gates of Hades. So, perhaps the One Piece is someone's heart that's been removed. Tashigi and Smoker have their hearts switched in chapter 661, and Tashigi is asked, are you sure you'll be okay without a heart? To which she replies, yes, strangely enough. In the same chapter, the Straw Hats have their hearts switched around, causing the crewmates that are affected to switch personalities. The devil fruit that causes this is heart-shaped. The person with this switch ability is also the captain of the Heart Pirates, and has a large heart tattoo on his chest. The person who connects this ability to the treasure of Maria Joie is Doflamingo, who sits on the heart seat. His brother wears a heart-covered shirt and is called Corazon, which means heart. We see something similar again when Law has his heart stolen and kept in a box by Caesar. Caesar drops some super foreshadowing when he says, give your heart to me, then our deal will be sealed. So there's more imagery suggesting some removal of a heart, but why would a human heart be important to the narrative of One Piece? We see hearts tied to suns and smiles through the Heart Pirates' Jolly Roger. Frankie wears a shirt saying Hito. The sun sits right on top of Frankie's heart, again hinting at some connection between the sun god and hearts. Oda explicitly showed both God Enel and Luffy's hearts to restart. Now, I've speculated before that the voice of all things is created by the heartbeats of all living things. This could be the infinite and accessible fuel source Vegapunk was alluding to, aligning with sun imagery, and its role as a fuel source. So a specific heart rhythm might create or activate some sort of fuel source in the One Piece world. We can assume this is the drums of liberation. We see the drums played in Wano at the same time Luffy's heartbeat restarts, suggesting the two are connected. Luffy is not the only character whose heart is tied to drums. Appu was shown in an SBS to have a drum for a heart. So it does seem possible hearts give off a drum beat, and a particular drum beat, aka the drums of liberation, has some powerful effects within the One Piece world. We see clues to the significance of hearts scattered across the blue planet. Lovesickness is a prominent disease in the story which ties to the heart. Hiriluk also has a sickness of the heart. Crocus said that Laboon is a whale with a human heart. This is told to the reader right next to Reverse Mountain, which is where I think the One Piece is located. Blackbeard seems to have done something to Whitebeard in Marineford, potentially involving his heart. Something physical surely did happen, which is why Oda had Blackbeard cover the whole process from the reader behind a sheet. Hearts are relevant to pirates externally also. For example, with Davy Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean, who kept his heart in a chest. Finally, the human heart is made of 4 chambers which process blue blood and red blood. This is reminiscent of the poneglyphs, with there being 4 road poneglyphs which are red and the rest which are blue. To further develop the idea, we take a look at another popular thread. This thread has been talked about for years, most commonly referred to as X marks the spot. Oda even included the X in the anime closing screen at the end of every episode. The idea is usually associated with Reverse Mountain being the location of Laugh Tale. So the cross is tied to Laugh Tale, and Laugh Tale is home to the One Piece, which we speculate is a heart. The most important, yet perhaps least known example of one of these X marks is on page 1, with the Pirate King and father of the current One Piece treasure. If we look at panel 2, we see that Roger has 2 blades crossed just below his chin. However, if we go back and look at panel 1, this is not what we see. Instead, Oda has the blades crossing off-center to the right. This is clearly the position where Roger's heart would be. So in panel 1 of the entire story, we are being shown what the One Piece is to some degree. In the current timeline, Vivi is given the cross symbol to symbolize her bond with the Straw Hats. This same X mark is seen in the same place on Emeth's arm, indicating Joy Boy also has ties to this symbol. So we see that the X is not only connected to Laugh Tale, but to hearts. Now, Luffy has an X across his chest. Pirates keep their treasure in a chest. The treasure that's in Luffy's chest is his heart. As a quick aside, this is contrasted by Kobe, who has a cross on his forehead. So, in other words, these guys will change hearts and minds. So, is the One Piece a heart? Well, not in the way we picture a heart. Why? It's because what happens if you take someone's heart and leave it in a box for 800 years? It would deteriorate and turn to dust, as we see with Brook. Just like Emu being preserved for so many centuries must require an additional element, something unnatural. Furthermore, Blackbeard's dream tells us that the One Piece is capable of destruction, so there must be more going on than a simple human heart. So far, the story has told us the world government spends a lot of time developing dark powers through advanced technology. A product of this method is shown, though, Luffy and other children growing up around scrap, junk or trash, symbolizing the repercussions of such development, and hinting that children are also thrown away in a similar manner under the world government's system. This special technology is shown through York to derive from greed in order to achieve unnatural feats. For example, giants are suggested to grow giant because of their free nature, whereas Caesar was trying to make children giants using experimentation and technology. If this way of doing things was inherited by Emu from the Ancient Kingdom, then it tells us that the Ancient Kingdom likely achieved an unnatural way of creating the drums of liberation, the voice of all things and all the other heart-related powers we see, such as Luffy's transformation to Gear 5. So the One Piece could actually be a mechanical heart. Luffy's fascination with mechs kinda leans into this idea, suggesting Luffy will find the One Piece really cool, despite not comprehending its true power. In conclusion, the heart plays a key role in the story. Doflamingo might have specifically been referring to Emu's heart in relation to Law's switching ability. A sickness of the heart might have been what killed Roger. Either way, I'm pretty confident that the One Piece is some sort of mechanical engine that emulates Nika, Joy Boy, and Luffy's heartbeat. If so, this would work like an engine, which fits with Luffy's gears and matches perfectly with multiple quotes in the series telling Luffy fuels others to liberate and free themselves. Gear 2 puts stress on Luffy's heart because his heart pumps blood more intensely. In this gear, Luffy creates steam, akin to steam engine, and the gear shortens his lifespan. If that is the case, then perhaps Emu used this specifically to control Zunesha, as we know the giant elephant is drawn to the drum rhythm. Alternatively, it could be that Emu has never had true access to this power, which would explain the world government's interest in creating the Mother Flame. Ultimately, Oda's deliberate selection of the heart as the treasures is mirrored by Luffy following his heart, which we see through his indifference towards navigation. This is Oda communicating a universal message of peace and love in an era characterized by conflicts and trauma. The One Piece world has a sickness, and it's through the heart that finds a cure, just like Hiriluk showed us. Oda emphasizes the need to restore faith in humanity through acts of compassion and genuine affection. By embracing love and nurturing good hearts, we can mend the fractures of society and foster a harmonious coexistence. Okay, so that's an overview of what the One Piece treasure is, but now let's speculate a little as to what might actually happen. Eventually, the Straw Hats will land on Laugh Tale. They'll discover that Joy Boy, who, like Luffy, couldn't swim, got washed up and stranded on the island of Laugh Tale with no way of getting off. It may be the case that he was saved by a whale and left on Laugh Tale as a result, beginning his relationship with the island whales. We can deduce that there's some account of Joy Boy's journey on Laugh Tale, but we are told paper doesn't last centuries, which is the reason we are told the poneglyphs were made. Instead, during his time stranded, he probably drew murals on the walls depicting his adventures. The drawings will probably look really bad, like how Luffy draws, which would explain why Roger and his crew were all laughing. There's a possibility that Joy Boy's body, or more accurately his skeleton, will be on Laugh Tale, acting as kind of proof to the reader that Joy Boy definitely was the one that drew the murals. However, this is as far as Roger and his crew likely made it. The Straw Hats, on the other hand, will be able to proceed into the heart of the ancient kingdom, where they will see a throne. The One Piece treasure will interact with this throne, sitting at the center of the city on Laugh Tale. This is why the reader sees Roger reacting to Laugh Tale at the same time Emu was introduced, where Emu sat on the empty throne. The throne acts as a lock, and the rightful heir to the ancient kingdom, Luffy, is the key. By sitting on the throne, Luffy inadvertently activated a power that can turn imagination into reality. In other words, the ancient kingdom is a city that artificially grants dreams using a mechanical heart that produces the drums of liberation. Once revealed, the city will activate, opening up and exposing the throne to the sun, which in turn ignites the eternal flame. This is the most powerful fuel source and is fueled by the heartbeat of the Mech heart, meaning the ancient kingdom was powered by the voice of all things in a sense. This is the abundant fuel source Vegapunk was referring to. This in turn activates the machinery within the city. Furthermore, it will likely reanimate a ton of giant mechs like Emeth that are at the bottom of the ocean, which will come up and join the final war. This is why Oda showed us Emeth coming out of the sea before. In the same vein, the revival of the ancient city will power up the ancient weapons too. As such, the One Piece will have the power to destroy the Red Line from within. That said, Luffy will destroy the throne before leaving Laugh Tale, preventing it from being used again in the future, opting not to destroy the Red Line there and then because it would destroy Fishman Island. Instead, the Straw Hats resolve themselves to bring down the Red Line their own way, with the help of their allies. Anywho, hope you enjoyed what we've been cooking today. Check out our sleep series if you want some second monitor content, and if you enjoyed, make sure to like and sub. If you made it this far, you've just won Doflamingo's jacket, so let me know where you want that delivered in the comments, and we'll get that dropped soon. Be nice to people, water your plants, and I'll see you on the next one.